Welcome back to Building Bigger Lives. I'm Catherine Peterson here with my co-host, the great Michael Regan, and today is another book club. We love to have these, and there's a lot of books that we have read, we love to read, and so it's fun to talk about a book with our audience and maybe introduce you to a book you haven't read or maybe incent you to read it. So today we're going to talk about, I think, one of the best books out there as far as habits go, which is Atomic Habits by James Clear. He is an amazing person to follow if you don't on Instagram and social. He's got a lot of just amazing things that he says, and I share a lot. But this was kind of a book that was written a while ago, and it goes through behavior change and some tips and tricks on creating some amazing habits. So with that, I'm going to bring in my fellow reader, Michael Regan, and let's talk about the book.
Yeah, I'm glad we picked this one. It's definitely I may have referenced this on an earlier episode, but you start to read dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of books over the course of your career, and some of them show up on a shelf in your collection that I like to
Mhm.
call the greatest hits collection. And I think of it kind of like in the music reference. It's like an artist who records, albums every year or 2 years, and over the course of their career, they've got 10 or 20 albums. But at some point, the label wants to put out the greatest hits collection. These are the best of the best, and
Mhm.
I feel like Atomic Habits falls on my shelf as one of those greatest hits books because I come back to it over and over again.
Yeah.
It's one that gets referenced regularly. You're right. It's not like a didn't get published last year. In fact, I think the first time I read it was in 2020 during the COVID season when I was
Mhm.
looking for some books to really sharpen my mindset at a time when maybe some of us were struggling a little bit with
Yeah.
our mindset. And I decided that was one of the few new ones I read because most of the rest of that time I really tried to spend time going back and rereading some of the classics. But what really struck me when I did was how applicable this book was. It was so, I mean, you could ask someone to just read a chapter,
Yeah.
chew on the concept and give it a shot. Go practice what you just read. And it
Mhm.
was so I mean, your kids could grab it. Your coworkers could grab it. It wasn't lofty thinking. It's heavy lifting, but only because he's going to make you do the work.
Mhm. Absolutely.
How about you?
Let's
When did you get introduced to it, and what was the draw?
I can't remember exactly when I read it. I should have checked my Goodreads, but it's been a while. I would say it was 2020 or before. And I think for me, it's amazing how many habits we create that we don't even realize we're creating. So I'm a little obsessed with habits and how they form, how to keep them, and how to change them out. So I'm kind of a habit nerd. So that's what I like about this book.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, let's start right off the top. For our audience that's read the book, they understand the concept of an atomic habit. Like that is a like we got to get the title out of the way first.
Yeah.
Why does James grab this phrase? What is it about an atomic habit that's different than just any other habit that he could have chosen to write about? And why would the audience care about an atomic habit?
So I think of atomic is spreading to other things
Hmm.
and moving um, throughout different spots and maybe compounding is kind of the words that I think about. Now, if that was his intention, I don't know, but that's what I think about when I think about atomic. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's interesting. So and maybe I'm a literalist. So you took it more in terms of where would it take me? Where would I go? And I took it in the terms of, okay, well, atomic, well, an atom. An atom is like the
Mhm.
smallest of measurable containments of energy. But when it is when combustion ignites an atom to explode, it's massive in its
Mhm.
capacity to impact. So I translate that as small things that have a massive impact. Um,
Mhm.
and I think he certainly discusses this in
Yeah.
concept in his book. But I think that's important for the audience to at least wrap their head around is whether it's as you described, like how it can just expand out into lots of different places, or the simplicity of just, a
Mhm.
tiny thing that can have a make a massive difference. I hope that that's encouraging to our audience because often when we think about habits, it's usually in the context of, oh, I have a bad habit and I need to break it. Or I
Mhm.
want to develop a better habit because the habit I have just isn't that good. And his approach is going to be, all right, well, let's start with doing really small things that
Mhm.
when I repeat them over and over are going to have
Yeah.
a huge impact. What comes to mind when you think about that? When you think about a habit you could create that you would do, change one small thing and then keep doing it over and over again, what kind of habit would come to mind when you think of that?
Well, I have a good example from today. So I don't like to lift weights, and I know I need to. And at first I was like, I have to do 30 minutes a day of weight training, blah, 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 right? And I just wouldn't do it because it was too big. So instead I was like, okay, I'm gonna start with 5 reps on each of my things. And then I've been adding 1 rep a day. And I
Hmm,
think I told you, you were like, how do you know you're gonna be the strongest you've been? And I'm like, well, I'm doing one more a day than I did yesterday. So that has gotten me to the
that's
point,
funny.
and then I've added weight, right? So it's like adding that, and he talks a little bit about being 1% better every day is another one of his concepts. So I've started really small, and in fact, my daughter was like, "Really, mom? That's what you're gonna lift?" And I was like, "Yes, that's what I'm gonna lift. I'm gonna build. So just stick with me here." So, but it has helped me, and now I'm consistent in my weight training.
Yeah, I love that example. I think a lot of people tend to go that direction because for some reason working out seems to fit this concept really
Mhm.
easily for most people. They understand the idea that, well, if I can't do any push-ups,
Yeah.
but I start with 1 and tomorrow
Yeah.
I can do 2. Ken Perry used to do his annual
Yeah.
push-up challenge,
That's right.
one of our close friends and previous guests. He this is a guy who loves pushing the push-up challenge out to his sphere of influence, but that's what it's built on, folks. It's start January 1 with 1 push-up. January 2, you do 2. January 3, you do 3, and we keep going. So you can do the math. I mean, by the 31st of
Mhm.
January, you're doing 31 a day. By the time you get to the end of the quarter, the end of the semester, and the end of the
Yeah.
year, you're getting a lot of push-ups in a day. That's an atomic habit.
Mhm.
Another one I think of, or maybe I ask you again, like, so great example in
Mhm.
your health account. Let's pick an atomic habit that might show up in an area of your life that is on the business side of the fence. What would be an
Mhm.
example of a small thing that you could commit to and then build on it in your business?
So an example might be, someone used it today in one of our calls of, I'm gonna call 2 people today, or I'm gonna reach out to 1 real estate agent, and just starting small and then building from there, gaining the confidence so that you can say, "Oh, I'm gonna reach out to 10 today because I know that I can do that today." So, just those little incremental growth points.
Yeah, so making calls, making reach
Mhm.
outs, those are also great examples. And I think often when those of us are making plans for things that we intend to do, we understand what we need to do. Most of us that are in a job we have
Mhm.
done for a while, we know what it takes to be successful with it. But there are probably certain things we like and certain things we don't like. And we tend to naturally gravitate toward the things we like. So if you love to, have, I don't know, let's say you like emptying your inbox. Well, you can spend all day in your email,
Mhm.
but you might not feel like you got much done at the end of the
Yeah.
day. Or you may love managing your calendar until it's just, this perfect looking Outlook example for all to enjoy, and yet, what's in that calendar are the actual things that need to get done. So, where are some areas that you would say you've found, and it could be you personally, could be people
Mhm.
you've spent time with, where they get paralyzed? Where is it that I know what to do, but this idea of start small just I, I haven't been able to get off the ledge. Where am I? Why am I paralyzed? Why can't I get this habit going?
I think some people overanalyze it and say, "Well, if I'm only doing 2 bicep curls, that's not gonna do anything." And then they think they have to do it perfect so they don't start. And that I think can definitely stop people from starting
Mhm.
because they're not gonna do it perfectly right away. And, that's like, I realize when I say it how ridiculous it sounds, but I'll tell you, I've definitely been stuck in that mode more than once.
Well, we sit here recording this episode toward the end of October. So you'll be listening to this at some point in the month of November of 2024. And you and I sat down about this time last year and imagined an idea of a
Mhm.
podcast that became Building Bigger Lives.
Yeah.
And we started recording in January of this year, and we started with an atomic habit. We
Yeah.
started with an idea of, look, let's just record one of these and see how it goes. And when we do, let's schedule a couple more and let's see how those go. And before you know it, we've gone every Wednesday throughout
Mhm.
the year. And we've even planned ahead to make sure we don't miss one because we decided, hey, that's part of our atomic habit is we want to drop a new episode for our audience every Wednesday. Was there ever a point where you had to wrap your head around the atomic habit of even this podcast?
Oh, 100%. I think that it seems overwhelming of like, if you would have said, "We're gonna be coming up on our 50th episode here in a month or 2," um, I I don't know if I would have believed you. So I think if we would have said at the
Mm.
beginning, "Let's do 50 episodes and see how it goes," that sounds like a lot. But when you break it into the weekly, it's actually not that much, and people all the time are like, "Oh, you must spend hours a week on the podcast," and really we don't. It's gone by really fast, and it's been a really simple process because we've broken it up into little tiny parts.
So I hope our audience hears these examples and realizes that that's the key to an atomic habit is figuring out how to get so incrementally small in our commitment to execute that repeating that small thing is not
Mhm.
difficult. Now, sustaining it might be, because you're right. If you'd have told me the first week of January, hey, we would not have missed a beat heading into Thanksgiving, I might have thought, are you sure about that? Because did you
Yeah.
look at your calendar? I looked at mine. That's a lot of committing. But when you just take it one day at a time, one episode at a time, one trip to the gym to lift at a time, one set of
Mhm.
reps at a time, one set of calls at a time, all these examples we gave, it does feel to me like suddenly our mindset shifts from thinking I can't do it to, well, maybe I can. Maybe it's
Yeah.
possible. Have you felt in an area of your life, was there any time where you felt through an atomic habit, a commitment to one, that mindset shift of, oh my gosh, I didn't think I could do this, but it's happening and I'm starting to believe I can.
Oh, I would say 100%. When I got into running, it that seemed unachievable, and definitely I got there. I think when I switched companies, it was very scary, and I kinda started with systems, which, James Clear does talk a lot about, of, "Holy cow, what are all the steps that I need to do, and will I be able to accomplish this?" And I think you had said, spend an hour a day doing some research and trying to line out the questions, and let's break it up a little bit, and that made it a little less daunting. So I think that there's probably hundreds of things I didn't think I was capable of till I broke them up.
All right, this is a really good pivot point because you just referenced something that I love. In fact, my favorite quote from the book, and I'll probably butcher it, but this is what I remember. Is he talks about the idea of systems in this context. People don't tend to rise to the level of their goals; they tend to fall to the level of their systems. So,
Mhm,
to your point, when we create systems, what they allow us to do is really minimize the space between our ambitions and our reality because systems create sustainability, create consistency, and
mhm,
they allow us to know what to do and know how to do them. So, the examples we gave all fall into that, whether it's, the accountability you have on Coffee for Closers every Friday, whether it's the accountability you have with your workouts at the gym, whether the accountability you had with me in the research you were doing around
mhm,
looking for companies. These are all things that create systems so that the risk of failing is really, really minimized. It'll never
mhm,
be eliminated because our brains are powerful. We're capable of doing some
mhm,
really dumb stuff. But if we think about that quote, we don't tend to rise to the level of our goals. We tend to fall to the level of our
mhm.
systems. that's really that really encourages me to make sure my systems are good.
And I'm going to we're bringing up all of our friends today. So I'm going to bring up Todd Bookspan. Win by Noon. That's an example of doing a little bit every single day to get towards your goals. So, what did you put on there? What were the, 5 calls you made that add up to big things? That's a system to track it. When I first started doing Miracle Morning, different book, I made this just handwritten chart of like the day and what I had done and marked it off and kept it by my bed. Even my weights now, I have a little sheet that I write my reps on, so I know I
Yeah.
do more the next day. So just those little tiny systems, it's so true that if it's right there, because my brain would not do me favors in this, and they would say, "Oh, it's fine to do 24 reps because I don't remember what I did yesterday, but if I have it written down, I'm not going to cheat." And same thing with the systems that we have. It allows you to trick to not let your emotions take over, to not let your brain tricks or your things that are going to try to talk you out of that habit come into play.
Okay, so I'm going to catch you off guard here, but I think you'll be able to handle it. We've been working together a long time, and
Mhm.
I'm guessing you'll agree that just about every quarter that I've known you, I've encouraged us to draft a simple focus plan.
Yep.
So I don't know how many of these you've drafted over the years, but is it fair to say maybe 2 dozen of them at this point?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. So this becomes a system. Once you've created the clarity around the outcomes in that quarter that you're trying to
Mhm.
measure, both personally and professionally, the commitment to the disciplines it's going to take to achieve that, both personally and professionally, and the commitment to the improvements that you need to make personally and professionally,
Mhm.
you now have a simple focus plan system. And so that's step one. You've got to have things written down.
Mhm.
But how many times have you, and again, you could, tell, this is okay to have transparency. How many times have you written those things down and found yourself going back later and being like, oh my gosh, I am not looking at this. I forgot that I wrote this down.
A lot. I would say last quarter I did that for sure because I got inundated with other problems that were not on it. But this quarter, I wanted to show you my this. I don't know if you can see it. I'll explain it to the listeners, but it is crinkled and looks like it's been run over by a car, maybe because I've been carrying it everywhere I go, so I don't do that again.
Love that.
So it is a well-used document at this point, which is good because we're still early in the quarter.
Okay, we're live without a net. So you've got this
Mhm.
crinkled document, which I love. Any plan that's dog-eared with a coffee stain and some writing on it,
Right.
I know we're using that plan.
Yeah.
But the ability to take the system a step further is
Mhm.
then to take all of those things that you've committed to do, the disciplines, and all of those improvements or projects that you've committed to achieve, and putting those into your calendar is another level of a
Mhm.
system because now we've said, okay, it's not just that I intended to do it and got it on paper. It's I took it from then that tool in which I organized it on paper and put it into my calendar so that I could do it. That level of system is going to measurably increase the odds that, again, when you get busy and you forget things, that you might not lose track of them.
Yeah.
And yet there's another level of that system we can go to, and my wife is a master at this. I feel embarrassed to say that as a coach, I learned this one from my wife every day is
Mhm.
she is then rigid about setting alarms because
Mm.
even when stuff is in your
Yep.
calendar, guess what? I mean,
Mhm.
has it ever happened that, I think you and I have had that experience recently where we were
Yep.
about to record an episode of Building Bigger Lives and I showed up looking like, a ragged dog who I'd been at the gym, way to go, but not ready for podcasting. Why? Because as I had things in my calendar, it all fit, but I really wasn't anticipating, yeah, but
Mhm.
what happens if anything, I didn't have enough margin,
Yeah.
didn't have enough buffer
Yep.
to get it in there.
White space.
Just a little true confession there, audience. Even the
Mhm.
coach sometimes has to revisit his margin. And so that level of system now is okay. Now something goes off to trigger it, so that even if I am busy or I'm taking too long
Mhm.
to do whatever I had before, it's a reminder that oh, got to wind this down. How when you hear all of that, does that
Mhm.
bring anxiety to you, or does that reduce anxiety for you when you hear about the levels of those systems?
I think sometimes if you're brain doesn't have to remember, oh, at 3 I have to do this. It's like becomes more automatic because you can relax and do what you're doing in that moment, knowing the alarm's going to go off. So, but I'm sure there's people who, and if I set 20 alarms a day, I would drive myself crazy, but I'm definitely a slave to my calendar, and that's on purpose because
Yeah.
it drives me and it helps me stay organized, and it works really well for what I need to do. And I think that's kind of that cue that he talked about in the book of, do
Yeah.
certain things to make it easy, to make it so that it's easy to do that habit. Like I've talked about this before. I lay out my clothes the night before I work out. I set my alarm for 5:41 because that's the time that I wake up to work out. I won't take a shower with it. So I try to set it up to make it easy and to make those cues happen so that I get up and go do it without even having to question if
Mm.
it's an option. It's not an option. So I think setting up those things in your calendar is great because it can really, really help you stick to those habits.
Yeah, I hope the audience took some notes there. Those are some really great tactical examples because the system isn't always the structure you create. It's also those small decisions you
Mhm.
make that allow that system to flow really smoothly. And the key I took away from that is simplification. Simplify it. We love the idea of simplification. I mean, I think maybe one of the first books you and I ever read together was Essentialism because I was such a huge fan of this ideology. Another book on my greatest hit shelf now that I think about that. Greg McKeown, to give the guy credit. Um, but the mindset of the essentialist is really what I think dovetails nicely with Atomic Habits, which is you're only focusing on what is essential so that your
Mhm.
execution does stay really simple. And I think that's really what, not to make light of James' last name, but that's what's really clear about his ideology
Mhm.
is he's removing all the excuses because whether it's the simplification, whether it's the system itself, or whether it's just starting really small, these are all good examples of his ideology and practice. And I hope for our audience, they're starting to get excited about the idea that this might be the book for me. If you've ever felt like, oh, I would love to break a bad habit or start a new good habit, but
Mhm.
every time I think about changing my habits, I just slip back into my old habits.
Mhm.
Atomic Habits is maybe the book you've been looking for your whole life, and hopefully one like Catherine and I are describing that'll give you the lift that you need because look, we're all humans being. We're all somewhere in the process of figuring this out. So I hope that's the case. Any other thoughts on our book club today, Catherine?
I think we can't leave it without talking about breaking bad habits, and he does talk through how to do that, like, make it invisible is my favorite, where if you don't wanna eat cookies anymore, don't buy cookies. Don't go down the cookie aisle. If you have them in your house, you're gonna eat the cookies. So, those are things that can help you, and I think he's got a lot of good tips in there, so reference the book for some of those on how to break those bad habits.
That's really good, and I'm glad you say that. I hear that and I think, gosh, I'm almost embarrassed at how obvious that is to think that, but that's sometimes what we need to hear.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just what we need to hear. Like if you know that one of your habits is rooted in something as simple as eliminating it as an option,
Mhm.
maybe start with eliminating it instead of trying to redesign everything around it. I
Right.
think about this in our healthcare system all the time, and I'm always so sad when I see folks that have to have so much medication to get through their daily routines. And I think I is there really a way in which maybe we could have addressed this through, like, what are you eating? How are you
Yeah,
exercising? What's your
yeah.
sleep like? Like, have we really made sure that, we've addressed really good health first? And if the reason they're struggling is maybe they just have a really bad habit, maybe they aren't doing those, but let's start with the habit first rather than just covering up that bad habit with some medication. That's probably a different topic for a different podcast, so I'll pause there, but the audience can get the hint of where I'm going with that is that it just makes me sad. I know people are hurting, but maybe a book like this, if you do have a bad habit, might help encourage you to take on the simplicity
Mhm.
of elimination, and maybe just finding that one thing you could remove from your lifestyle or your home that
Mhm.
keeps you from succeeding.
And I'm gonna kind of hopefully bring this full circle. So my doctor and I were talking about how I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I can't go back to sleep, but I've learned that through an app I have, there's some sleep meditations I can do. So I was talking to her about that, and I'm like, those work really well for me if I wake up in the middle of the night. And she was like, hey, I have an idea for you. Why don't you do them before you go to bed as a preventative measure instead of doing it in crisis? Just like how you can stop eating donuts before you have diabetes. And I was like, oh, I never thought about it that way, which is hilarious because my whole life is around this stuff. And sure enough,
Hmm.
that has worked. So sometimes it's thinking about something different, having someone point out the obvious, and creating a different habit.
Well, today we have talked about a book that we both love, Atomic Habits by James Clear. I hope if, as our audience has enjoyed our takeaways and our thoughts on this, that we've encouraged somebody to say, "I'm going to download that, I'm going to listen to it, or I'm going to buy it and I'm going to read it," or who knows, maybe it's sitting on the shelf right behind you as you're listening today, and you realize, "Oh yeah, I think somebody gave me that book a few years ago. I just forgot about it." Go grab it and take what I said up front. Like, I remember introducing this book to a client at one time, and I said, "Just read the first 3 chapters." Literally. If you can read the first 3 chapters and put it down because it's not for you, then I'll buy it. It's not for you. My guess is when you read the first 3 chapters, you're gonna be hooked because it really will give you hope for developing new and better habits, new and better systems, eliminate things that just aren't critical to your success, and hopefully shift your mindset to believing you can do bigger and better things, which is what building bigger lives is all about, Catherine.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, listen, any closing thoughts to our audience, or shall we call it a wrap today?
No, go create those good habits.
All right, folks, thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in and following us here. Whether you are on Apple and listening to us on Apple Podcasts, whether you're on Spotify, whether you like to watch our videos on YouTube, we're so thankful that you tune in. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and certainly share an episode with a friend. If this was helpful to you today, maybe it'll be helpful to them as well. And we'd sure love to add somebody else who joins us on the journey as we're wrapping up. We're closing in on 50. That's what Catherine says. So here we go. We've built our atomic habits with the podcast, and we couldn't be more excited to share them with you. Hope to see you on an episode again soon.